They were busy rounding up the most extreme radical fundamentalists they could find anywhere, arming them with advanced weapons, while carrying forward the program of radical Islamization of Pakistan. It's another one of Reagan's gifts to the world, along with Pakistani nuclear weapons. The goal of these U.S. operations was not to defend Afghanistan. That might have been acceptable policy, but that was not the goal. The goal was explained most clearly by the person in charge, the CIA station chief in Islamabad. He was running the operations. He said the goal is to kill Soviet soldiers. He boasted that he loved this noble goal, making it very clear in his words that the mission was not to liberate Afghanistan, which he didn't care about. Many of you should be familiar with Zbigniew Brzezinski's somewhat similar boasts. By the early 1960s, I was pretty deeply engaged in anti-war activities. Details are informative. They tell us a lot about the intellectual, cultural climate in places like, say, liberal Boston, where I was. I'll skip that. But by 1966, my personal involvement was deep enough so that my wife went back to college after 17 years to get a degree, had 3 kids to take care of, and it looked as if I might be facing a long prison sentence, which actually came very close. The trial was announced, but shortly after that it was canceled because of the Tet Offensive. It's a very significant event which convinced the business community in the United States, the ones who fundamentally make the decisions, that the war was becoming too costly. And in any event, the major war aims had been achieved. That's another long story I won't go into. Well, after policy shifted, after the Tet Offensive and policy quickly shifted, it suddenly turned out that everyone in Cambridge had been a long-time opponent of the war, in deep silence, I should say. The Kennedy memoirists, there are a whole pile of people who wrote memoirs at Camelot in the early 60s, they all rewrote them. They rewrote the memoirs, radically revising. They were untroubled, and commentators were untroubled by the radical revisions or by the extensive documentation that the new tale that they were telling was completely false. The new tale was that Kennedy had been a dove and was trying to end the war and so on. The assassination prevented this noble effort. The evidence is just overwhelming, the documentary public and private evidence that he was kind of at the hawkish end of his administration. He knew that the war was very unpopular, so he figured we'd better get out of it pretty soon, but he insisted to the very end, a couple days before the assassination, that we can't consider withdrawal before victory is assured. But even before the Tet Offensive, say 1966, 67, there were growing doubts in these circles, not doubts about right and wrong. Those are questions that don't arise when we're engaged in some activity somewhere, but rather about the question that does arise, namely the likelihood of success. Maybe a paradigm example was a widely read book by historian Arthur Schlesinger, one of Kennedy's advisors. He was beginning to be concerned by the 1966 that victory might not be so easily at hand. Here's the way he put it. He said, "We all pray that the Hawks will be right and that the surge of the day will bring victory. And if it does, we will be praising the wisdom and statesmanship of the U.S. government in gaining military victory." And then he went on to describe accurately what the victory would look like. Military victory while leaving the tragic country gutted and devastated by bombs, burned by napalm, turned into a wasteland by chemical defoliation, a land of ruin and wreck with its political and institutional fabric pulverized. So if that succeeds, we'll all be praising the wisdom and statesmanship of the American government. Remember, this is a liberal government we're talking about, and the liberal intellectuals. But he thought probably the escalation wouldn't succeed, and it would prove to be too costly for ourselves, so perhaps strategy should be rethought. And after the Tet Offensive, it was rethought essentially under instruction by the business world. Well, not that much has changed today when, say, Obama is hailed as a leading principled opponent of the Iraq invasion because he said that it was a strategic blunder. Those aren't new ideas. You could read that. You could have read that in Pravda in the early 1980s. There were plenty of people in the Communist Party writing openly saying it's a strategic blunder to invade Afghanistan. We're not going to gain anything. It's going to cost us too much. We don't call that principled in that case, but we call it principled in our case, which is just an indication of how deeply rooted the imperial mentality is. Extirpating it is no easy task. Well, it's sad to say, but unfortunately it's not false, that within the dominant spectrum, attitudes like these, which you might call liberal imperialism, they're the good guys. There's a likely alternative. It's revealed by some of the most recent polls, some of them in the last few days. About half of voters say that the average Tea Party member is closer to their views than President Obama. Fewer select Obama. On virtually all issues, Republicans are, according to the polls, are trusted by the electorate more than Democrats, in many cases by double digits. Now, other evidence suggests that these polls are not recording trust, they're recording distrust. The level of anger and fear in the country is like nothing I can recall in my lifetime. By comparison, the 1930s, where the Depression was much deeper, were sort of a period of hope. Somehow it's going to get better, we can do something about it. Not now. And since the Democrats are in power, and those are the attitudes, the revulsion over the current social and economic political world attaches to them. And unfortunately, these attitudes, though they, in some respects, surprising, given their scale and depth, they are understandable. For over 30 years, real incomes for the majority of the population have stagnated or declined. Social indicators, basic measures of the health of a society, they have steadily deteriorated since the mid-1970s. Before that, they grew, closely tracking growth, as you'd expect. But they've been declining. Their last figures are from a couple of years ago. It's back to 1960. What people... these are in large part the consequences of very conscious decisions in the 1970s to radically modify the nature of the economy, financializing the economy. And that has a corollary. The corollary is the hollowing out of domestic production. It still goes on, but not here. Like the same managers and owners produce in Mexico or China or somewhere else. And that means no jobs. Well, what people see before their eyes and what's clearly fueling the anger and hatred is that the bankers who are primarily responsible for the current crisis and who were then saved from bankruptcy by the public, they're now reveling in record profits and huge bonuses, while official unemployment, which is way below actual unemployment, is at about 10%. In manufacturing industry, it is actually at depression levels, 1 in 6. And the good jobs are not likely to return for the reasons I mentioned. Well, people, they want some answers. Why is this happening to us? We're not living in third world. It's not the Stone Age. It's not third world conditions. But why is this happening in a rich society? They see plenty of wealth going into very few pockets, probably record levels of inequality. They want to know why this is happening. And they are hearing answers from only one place. Talk radio, Fox News, Sarah Palin, they're giving them answers. And the answers actually have some internal coherence. I mean, I spend a lot of time listening to talk radio while I'm driving, and it's interesting. It shouldn't be laughed at. The people involved may be complete cynics, but the people who call in aren't. They're sincere. They have grievances. They want answers. They're getting answers. And the answers are internally coherent.